at the beginning of October, 1 month down in autumn, which I am actually quite sad about. And so because of that, I have decided in this video, I am really going to embrace and make the most out of the next 2 months of autumn. And what better way to do that than to read some fantasy books? My first thoughts on this book are that I'm actually really enjoying it. It's a dark gothic fantasy book, which is just perfect for this time of year and the perfect first book for me to read as I'm trying to get more into the autumn season and the vibe of autumn itself. So it's been great for that. The premise of the book is we are following this young girl who essentially has like a magical monster within her in a world where magical monsters and magic itself is very limited and often not allowed to live. So because of this, we're following her and how she survives this. And what I'm also really enjoying is because it's a fantasy world, the author is really building the world around this character and in a way that isn't overwhelming. I sometimes find with fantasy books that when an author tries to build the world for the reader, it can be so much information that the plot itself can often get lost. Whereas so far in this book, I've been enjoying the amount of information that we're being given in a very poetic and descriptive way that helps us understand the story better, but without taking away from the character and the main plot itself. So I've been really enjoying that. I am at the beginning of the story, so I've got a lot to go. But first thoughts are I'm really enjoying this. I do think it's part of a series. I think trilogy, but it might be a 2-part series. So if I really enjoy this, I may read the other ones too. So I have officially finished this book and I loved it so much so that I want to erase it from my memory so that I can read it again for the first time and just experience it all over again. I loved it that much. Now, what did I enjoy about this book? Firstly, it is definitely a dark gothic fantasy, which is exactly what I was looking for, and you really feel that atmosphere throughout the book. It's not something you have to remind yourself of, it's always there, which is great, and it definitely supports the main plot of the story as well. The second thing is the entire premise of the book. This young woman who essentially has a monster within her and you get to see how she survives it. I love this premise and you really get to see the conflict that she has throughout the book, which is very interesting and really helps with the plot of the story and just makes it that much more intriguing to read. I also really enjoyed the world building of this book. It is given throughout the narrative in a way that really helps support the reader's understanding of the society and of why the characters choose certain actions that they do, rather than it feeling overwhelming or unnecessary. So I really enjoyed the world building as well. Now, I cannot forget to mention the romance in this book. I really enjoyed the romance. It is definitely a slow burn, so you only really get to experience it later on in the book, but you can absolutely see how these two characters ended up together. Sometimes I feel like authors put in a romance just for the sake of having one, but in this narrative you can definitely see the romance as a subplot and it supports the main story, which is lovely. I definitely really enjoyed that. Now, there is actually a second book to this. For some reason, I thought it was a trilogy, but there's only one sequel, and I have already ordered it, so I will be picking it up from my local bookshop very soon. So I'm excited for that. Now, there are a couple of, I wouldn't say issues, but just comments about the book that I want to mention. The first one being there are a few additional characters that we are introduced to and definitely have an impact on the main characters, but we're never really given a conclusion or any further information to them. So I do hope that we're given more of this insight in the sequel, because I was left with a few questions about certain characters that I do want answered. The second thing is, although I really enjoyed this romance, it's definitely a slow burn, a little bit too much of a slow burn. You only really get to experience and enjoy it quite late on in the book. So I do wish that it had been brought a bit earlier on in the book. And the third thing that was a bit of an annoyance is essentially the author tries to prevent the characters from swearing, and then so instead the characters say other words, which gets a bit annoying about 2/3 of the way through the book, but it's something you can definitely deal with. That all being said, I do give this book, I would say 4.5, 5-star rating. 4.5 only because of the characters that I'm still left with questions on, and I did want a bit more from the romance, but it's definitely an enjoyable book. I see why so many people are recommending this book, because now I am one of those people. So I am 38% through this book. The only reason I know that is because I'm reading it on my Kindle app. So this is a children's fantasy. I'm definitely enjoying it. It's light-hearted, it's easy going, it's an easy read. You know there's going to be a happy ending. So it's definitely a bit of a break from dark gothic fantasy. So I am actually quite enjoying it. It's definitely one that I read when I don't want to think too much or get too hooked. It's one that I can kind of pick up and put down throughout my week quite easily. Now, of course, don't read this if you want something darker, if you want something more elaborate, or where you don't know what the plot twists are going to be. I can already kind of guess what they're going to be. It's definitely not one to read if you want something a bit more thoughtful, because it is obviously a children's fantasy, but I am enjoying it. It's a nice, easy read. It's a nice break. It still gets me into the vibe of autumn because it is a fantasy, but it's just not a dark gothic one, because I wanted a bit of a break from that and just a bit of an easier read as well. So I am enjoying that at the moment. I have finished my second book, which is The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. I quite enjoyed it. It's a nice, easy, cozy read. It's still fantasy, but not dark fantasy, which is what I wanted to break from. So it's a children's fantasy, which is nice and easy, and you know it's going to have a happy ending. I like the way the author intertwined all of the fairy tales and how we got to see each of the kingdoms. There's like a dwarf forest, there's a charming kingdom, a fairy kingdom, and a couple of others. So I really liked seeing and experiencing that. It was quite nice how they were all blended together. Parts of the book where I kind of got a bit bored, but not enough to stop, because there are definitely parts of the book where I was intrigued and wanted to continue reading. There were also some jokes in there that I was unsure as to why they were in a children's book, but maybe that's just me. All in all, I would give this, for what it is, a children's fantasy, of 4 stars. I quite liked it. I definitely read the whole thing, and it is part of, I think, a 6-part series. I don't plan on reading the other books anytime soon. However, if I do get into the mood for a light fantasy, then it is a possibility. So I have started reading this book and I already have a few thoughts. Now, firstly, the premise of the book. Essentially, we are following this struggling artist who is in his late 20s, early 30s, and we get introduced to two of his best friends very early on, and we are also made aware that he is not talking to his family because of some issues that have happened quite recently. We don't know what exactly, but we know that they're not talking. And then there are these parties that happen once a year, very extravagant Gatsby type of parties that everyone wants to get invited to. And our protagonist gets to go to one of them, and he is immediately intrigued, almost obsessed with the host of the party. And that is kind of where we're at. Also, this is based in the 1920s London. So the descriptions of the place are gorgeous and you get to really feel the 1920s. That being said, one thing that I am struggling with is how descriptive every single thing is. Don't get me wrong, they're very poetic, and I think some of them definitely help with the world building, but it's all the time everywhere that it's so overwhelming. Every single atom is being described, and it is causing me to have to stop reading after like 20 minutes, which is not only slowing down my progress but also preventing me from really getting hooked by the story because I just have to keep stopping. So that is one thing that is really irritating me at the moment. I'm hoping either it lessens or maybe I get used to it so I can actually get into the book, but that is something that I'm already struggling with, and I'm very early on in the book, not even a third of the way through, not even close to a third of the way through. And so that is something that is definitely irritating me already. That being said, I do like the premise. I am interested in what happens. I am just struggling to get into it. So I'm going to see how that goes. On a side note though, look how short this chapter is. It's literally like those 2 pages, like 4 or 5 pages. So if you are someone who loves short chapters like me, then this is great because it gives you a great place to stop and put the book down. So I am loving that. I'm going to see how it goes. Hopefully I can get a bit more into it and the story moves along a bit more, because at the moment I feel like because I have to keep stopping, it's making me feel like I've been reading it for longer than I actually have. And so it feels like it's not really progressing when it's simply because I just have to keep putting it down. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. It did not get better. And I really tried to get into this book. And there were definitely moments where I was intrigued, but those moments were fleeting. And I think there's a few reasons for this. Firstly, the main character, Forster, who we follow throughout the narrative, he is not infatuated with this woman. He is obsessed. And when he's not obsessed with her, he's complaining about his life. And I think this only works when the reader cares about the character. I did not care. I was bored. After maybe a quarter or a third of the way through the book, I was bored of his complaints and I was kind of bored of him. So that made the book feel like a drag the whole time because he is who we were following. So that is the first issue I had. Secondly, the plot itself, it really didn't pick up. It picked up maybe a third of the way through and then it fell flat again all the way until the end, which made the whole book feel quite draining to read because it felt like nothing was really happening. When I finished this book, it felt unsatisfying. It felt like, what was the point in reading that? And I do not enjoy that in a book. I don't think anyone really does. Now, I really wanted to, because this is based in 1920s London. The descriptions are so stunning and poetic. There are a lot of them, but they are gorgeous. And so that did keep me wanting to read it because they are amazing descriptions. And because of that, I really wanted to enjoy the plot, but I just couldn't get into it. I'm giving this book a 1.5-star rating, which is a shame. I think it's safe to say my favorite book out of the ones that I read in this video was the first one, which is One Dark Window. I have actually got the second one and I will be reading that one very shortly because I really enjoyed the novel, and I'm definitely going to keep an eye on the author and see what else she puts out. Now, did these books help me get into the autumn vibe? Absolutely, they definitely did. Now, I think fantasy books are for the whole year round. However, especially the darker fantasy, I think that suits autumn perfectly, especially the first and third books, because those lent into the darker side a bit more. So that was wonderful. Not only that, but also just reading in a cozy vibe or going to a cafe, having a latte and reading a book has just been perfect for autumn. It's really helped me get into the embrace of the season, and I really enjoyed making this video, so I will be making more of them. Make sure to drop in the comments what your favorite read has been so far this autumn. Other than that, I will see you in the next one. Bye.